Em prosseguimento, formaremos a mesa integrante do segundo painel a debater o tema Modelos de independência das autoridades de proteção de dados pessoais e privacidade. Para presidir os trabalhos, convidamos a professora doutora Renata Mota Maciel. Professora Renata é do Programa de Pós-Graduação Estrito Sensu em Direito da Universidade 9 de Julho, Uninove, doutora em Direito Comercial pela Universidade de São Paulo, juíza titular da Segunda Vara Empresarial e de Conflitos de Arbitragem da Comarca da Capital do Estado de São Paulo. Convidamos para compor a mesa o professor doutor Antoine Guillemin. Advogado, trabalha no Grupo de Privacidade e Proteção de Informações na FASC em Montreal, atua nas áreas de proteção de informações pessoais, acesso a informações, publicidade, marketing online e segurança cibernética. Assistência em processos de conformidade nos termos do Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados, GDPR, doutorado em Direito da Tecnologia de Informação pela Universidade de Montreal e pela Universidade Paris I, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Convidamos a professora doutora Silvia Suzana Toscano. Professora Silvia é advogada especializada no direito informático, mestrado em administração pública pela Universidade de Buenos Aires, professora de graduação e pós-graduação, decana da Faculdade de Ciências Jurídicas e Sociais da Universidade Argentina, membro das reuniões da Comissão de Políticas Digitais e Ciberespacial do Conselho Argentino para as Relações Internacionais, membro do Instituto de Filosofia Política e História das Ideias Políticas da Academia Nacional de Ciências Morais e Políticas, ex-funcionária do Ministério da Justiça e dos Direitos Humanos da Nação Argentina. A professora já está chegando. E para promover o debate, convidamos o professor doutor Gabriel Loreto Lochagin. Professor Gabriel é professor de Financeiro e Direito Econômico da Faculdade de Direito de Ribeirão Preto, USP, mestre e doutor em Direito Econômico Financeiro pela Faculdade de Direito da USP. Lembramos que no final deste painel realizaremos sorteio de livros. Nesse momento, passo a palavra para a professora Renata.
Boa tarde a todos. Dando início aos trabalhos desse segundo painel, agradeço a professora Cíntia, né, pelo convite para participar e passo imediatamente a palavra ao professor Antoine, que falará por 30 minutos. O tema do professor Antoine é o escopo territorial das leis de proteção de dados pessoais no setor privado, comparação entre Quebec, Canadá e União Europeia.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu gostaria de agradecer a todos pela presença e, em especial, à professora Cíntia. Além disso, quero congratular pelo novo Instituto IAPD. Sabia que o Brasil era o melhor, depois da França, no futebol. Mas agora sei que é um dos melhores na proteção de dados. Por fim, agradeço também aos tradutores. So, for obvious reasons, I'm going to continue in English. That being said, I'm going to try to speak really slowly just to make sure that you get the translation properly. So, in the last decade, many countries have adopted or reviewed their privacy and data protection laws. When we think about the GDPR in the EU, we also think about California with the California Consumer Privacy Act coming into force in 2020. And finally, obviously, Brazil. Brazil with the General Data Protection Law, the LGPD, which will be fully applicable in August 2020. Canada and the province of Quebec are exception, and we are running a bit late. I'm going to start with Quebec. The Quebec Act, Private Sector Act, is from 1994, and since then has never been reviewed. So let me tell you something, in many ways it's really outdated. Regarding PIPEDA, which is the Federal Personal Information Protection and Electronic Document Act, it's from 2001, and it's a bit better, but obviously it's not as sophisticated and up to date as the GDPR. So in this conference, the goal is to discuss the determination of the territorial scope of these data protection laws, namely the Quebec Act, PIPEDA, as well as the GDPR. And in other words, the idea will be to ask ourselves, when an organization does not have a physical presence in a jurisdiction, does it mean that data protection law does not apply to this organization? It's pretty much the main question. And why would you ask yourself such a question? There's maybe two reasons. First, it's a question of compliance. Many organizations are global and often they would operate in Canada, in Brazil, in the EU. So if they want to be fully compliant with all the applicable laws, they must be aware which laws apply, obviously. So that's the first reason. The second aspect is really a question of jurisdiction for privacy regulators. In other words, if there is a company based outside of a jurisdiction but affecting data subject individual in the jurisdiction of the regulators, the main question is, do they have the jurisdiction to intervene? So that's really the main reason why you would wonder yourself and ask questions regarding the territorial scope of data protection laws. So first, I'm going to start with Quebec, the Quebec Act. And I must mention first that Section 1 of the Quebec Act provides for its application. And basically, the Quebec Act, applies to any enterprise processing personal information. Not processing, would be collecting, using, and communicating personal information. The Civil Code of Quebec provides a definition of enterprise. But between us, it's really complex. Otherwise, it would be too easy. So in that sense, Quebec tribunals have used 5 cumulative factors to find the existence of an enterprise under Quebec laws. The first one is, of course, having a plan specifying the enterprise economic objectives. So it's a business plan, and it doesn't have to be really complex. It can be quite simple. The second aspect is having assets related to the pursuit of this objective, building, machineries, something like that, something tangible, material. Third aspect, a series of habitual juridical acts. Then market economic player interested in goods or services of the enterprise. And finally, obviously, economic values and profit. So these are the factors to take into account if you want to know if this is an enterprise, and incidentally, if the Quebec Private Sector Act applies. So this is really the reasoning, the rationale. But that being said, despite having these factors, Quebec tribunals have never developed a specific approach regarding the application of the Quebec Act to foreign companies operating in the province of Quebec, but without a physical presence. So in other words, if you're a company in Brazil, but you target the Quebec market, it's not quite clear if the Quebec Act applied to you. And that's pretty much the question. And of course, it has consequences because first, you would have to comply with the Quebec Act. And second, you may be under the jurisdiction of the Quebec Privacy Commissioner. That being said, even though we don't have any tests, there's 2 interesting case law from the Quebec Privacy Commissioner. The first one is from 1998, so it's quite old. And in this case law, the Quebec Privacy Commissioner stated that the Act applies to every enterprise that conducts business in Quebec, independently of the location of the business and the place where the personal information is stored. So that's the first aspect. The second interesting decision is the one from 2008, Norseco, the decision Norseco, which tells us that the Act applies to foreign companies doing business in Quebec or who produce goods or services for the Quebec market. So basically, when you have the intention to offer goods or services to the Quebec market, then you may be subject to the Quebec Act and potentially to the jurisdiction of the Quebec Privacy Commissioner. So the conclusion is quite simple. First, in Quebec, there is no test for assessing the territorial scope of the law. There's nothing in the law, there's nothing in the case law. Second aspect, however, the physical presence is not decisive to determine the act applicability. And this is something really important to understand. Nowadays, physical presence is not really relevant just to see if privacy laws should apply. And obviously, because of the fact that we are lacking a test for the territorial scope of the Quebec Act, well, it creates uncertainties for companies, including companies in Brazil. So companies in Brazil who wants to do business in Quebec don't really know if the act applies to them and how they should comply. You should be aware that we are expecting a draft bill in the next few months in order to modernize the Quebec Act, and not only regarding the territorial scope of the Quebec Act, but also regarding business contact information, transaction exemption, because between us, the Quebec Act is in many ways outdated. I'm realizing I did not. Okay, that's fine. So now we move on Canada. And first, you have to understand that PIPEDA, which is the federal statute, apply to organizations who collect, use, or disclose personal information in the course of commercial activities. So that's very important to understand that it's really a privacy law applicable in the private sector. Keep in mind that it also applies to federal undertakings, but in this conference we will focus on the private sector. Further, obviously, since we've talked about Quebec, in certain provinces there's an exemption. It's the case of Quebec, BC, and Alberta, but we will avoid this question for time consideration. So, like in Quebec, like in the Quebec Act, in PIPEDA, you will not find any test with respect to its territorial reach. So you don't have anything within the law, just explaining what's the scope of application of PIPEDA in terms of territoriality. However, the Canadian courts have used what we call the real and substantial connection test to determine if PIPEDA applies to organization. And what is it about? How can we summarize such a test? It's pretty simple. At the end of the day, the question the court asks themselves is there a sufficient connection between Canada and the activity in question to apply PIPEDA? We had many case law in the last years in this regard. And keep in mind that the text in itself is quite flexible. But that being said, following a careful analysis of the main case law, we can still present some factors to take into account when we just assess if there is a real and substantial connection. The first one, obviously, it's when you collect, use, or disclose personal information of Canadian or Canadian organization customers. So basically, even though you are not in Canada, you process the personal information of Canadians. So that's the first aspect. The second one, obviously, is the location of the target audience. In a sense that if you target the audience in Canada specifically, then potentially, yes, you could be subject to PIPEDA. And further, you could be under the jurisdiction of the Privacy Commission, OPC. Then there's also the source of the content and all the data, which could be taken into account. Also the location of the website operator and the host server. And another factor is the fact that you carry business in Canada. In other words, you do have commercial activities. So for instance, you have Brazilian companies and you have, for instance, some activities, even though it's really limited, and potentially you could be subject to PIPEDA. You have many contacts with Canada, and also finally the fact that you are making marketing and advertising dedicated to Canadians. So basically these are the factors to take into account just to assess if PIPEDA applies. And the reason why it's interesting is because these factors are actually very similar to what we have in the GDPR. And it's going to be the third aspect, the third section of this presentation. But we realize that even though we don't have a specific section in PIPEDA regarding the territorial scope of PIPEDA, the test, the case law test I just presented is very similar to what we have to actually the test used in the EU. We could even think of the fact that if a company asks the client to pay in Canadian dollars, then it would be a factor to say that PIPEDA potentially could apply. If a company were just using English and French as languages, then potentially it's a factor, to take into account just to say that PIPEDA applies. So that's pretty much the situation regarding Canada. I will give you a very, it's a pretty good example, quite recent also. It's a famous decision, well, at least in Canada, from 2017, AT versus Globe 24 Hours. And in this case, the federal court applied PIPEDA to a Romanian national. And this Romanian national was operating a website that collected and published Canadian case law containing personal information. And Canadian had to pay to remove the decision about themselves, which was not really, reasonable in many ways. And although the website was operated and hosted in Romania, the federal court found that Globe 24 Hours acted in contravention of PIPEDA because it contained Canadian decision, targeted Canadians, and impacted Canadians. So in other words, we had an entity abroad in Romania, and still the OPC, the Privacy Commission in Canada, decided that he had jurisdiction and PIPEDA applied. So it's a really good example just to show you that even though you don't have any offices, you don't have any employees in Canada, then potentially PIPEDA could apply, and secondly, you may be under the jurisdiction of the Privacy Commission of Canada. That's something quite big for company also in Brazil, because if you target the Canadian market, well, you should be aware of PIPEDA, and potentially you may have to comply with PIPEDA. The conclusion is quite simple in the end. We don't have any test in PIPEDA itself in the text, but that being said, the tribunals developed real and substantial connection tests. Again, as in Quebec, the physical presence is not always relevant. And finally, as in Quebec, keep in mind that the federal statute PIPEDA, we are expecting changes very soon of PIPEDA, and particularly in order to maintain the adequacy decision under the GDPR. And I think other countries are in the same situation, including, for instance, Uruguay. Now, I'm moving on the GDPR. And you may be aware that the GDPR was adopted in 2016, came into force, was fully applicable since May 2018. And in the GDPR, it's way more clear in the sense that there is specific provision regarding the territorial scope of the GDPR. And if you take section 3 of the GDPR, well, it will explain you the regime when we talk about the scope of application of the GDPR. And basically, there's two situations. Either you have an establishment in the EU, or you are targeting EU consumers, EU individuals. Regarding the establishment, we can qualify that as a real and effective activity exercised through stable arrangement. This is the definition of the European Court of Justice. And basically it means that you may have an employee, a single employee, or offices in the EU, and in that sense you may have to comply with the GDPR, and you may be under the jurisdiction of the EU main establishment regulator. So that's pretty much the situation. It's pretty simple in this regard. But what's most interesting is the second test. And the second test is regarding the target, what we call the targeting test. And basically, you don't have any establishment. You're in Brazil, and you don't have any employees nor any offices in the EU. But that being said, you are a Brazilian company doing well, and in that sense, you offer goods or services to individuals in the EU, and or you monitor the conduct of the individual in the EU. In this situation, you may be subject to the GDPR. And as you may be aware, it's actually pretty expensive and time-consuming to be GDPR compliant. But in this regard, I think it's really important to mention the fact that it's not only offering goods or services in the EU, because potentially you could have French people deciding just to buy specific product from Brazil. And even though you don't intend to offer product in the EU market, you are in a situation where you do have some EU individual. The idea is really a question of intention. Do you have the intention to offer goods or services to the EU? And that's the main aspect. And obviously, when we talk about intention, especially jurists, we are skeptical. What does it mean exactly? And that's why there is specific factors, specific criteria, which has been clarified in the GDPR, in the recitals at the very beginning. And I will give you some example. For instance, if on your website or in the documentation of your company, you are making reference to the EU market or to specific EU member states, then potentially it means that you have the intention to offer goods or services to the EU. That's a first example. The second one, you are allowing the consumer to pay in euros or any other EU currency. So in that sense, it's another factor to take into account. Languages. You may offer the products in Spanish, in English, or even better, in Portuguese. Well, Portuguese, it means that not necessarily you are targeting Portugal, but depending if you offer other languages of the EU, it may be a factor showing that you don't want only to target the Brazilian market, you also want to target the Portuguese market. Other explanation also, a last one, the fact that you are using a EU top-level domain. So for instance, you have a website and it's finished by .fr. Potentially means that you target the French market because you have a website dedicated for France. Or the fact that you try just to be referenced on engine search in France. So basically, there are a couple of factors to take into account just to see if yes or no you have the intention to offer goods or services to the EU. And that's actually very interesting. And any companies, including in Brazil, should do this analysis just to make sure that the GDPR does not apply. Because if you are not aware that the GDPR applies and eventually you have a complaint at a privacy regulator in the EU, well, it could be a lot of trouble. You could have done that at the beginning. So this is something very important, and many companies, and I'm working often with Canadian companies and not as often as I should with Brazilian companies, but many Canadian companies ask just us, as lawyers, just to prepare such an analysis, just to assess if the GDPR applies to them. So further, obviously, if you monitor the conduct of individuals within the EU, well, potentially also you could be subject to the GDPR. And you have some example on the slide just you're seeing right now. We don't have many precedents for now, for obvious reasons. The GDPR has been fully applicable since only May 2018. But that being said, keep in mind that the European Data Protection Board issued quite recently a draft guidance on the territorial scope of the GDPR. So this is something to keep in mind, even though it's a version for public consultation, it's a really relevant document just to assess if yes or no we are subject to the GDPR. You have here, it's confusing between French and English, but you have here a graph just explaining the whole process when we talk about the GDPR and the fact that there's two different situations. Either you have an establishment or either you don't have an establishment but you target the EU market. So in the end, I think it's important to understand that any organization, including in Brazil, should keep in mind that they could be subject to some data protection laws abroad Brazil, and that's the main aspect. In other words, the fact that you have a physical presence only in Brazil does not mean that you are not subject to any data protection laws in the rest of the world. So that's really important to understand that. So basically, you could be subject to PIPEDA, you could be subject to the Quebec Act, and you could be subject to the GDPR. So that's pretty much the main conclusion. The second aspect is specifically regarding the LGPD, the Brazilian legislation. And honestly, I was not able just to give, to give a presentation regarding the LGPD. But that being said, you should review the LGPD because there's a specific section regarding the territorial scope of the LGPD, section 3 of the text. And the presentation and the factors I just presented to you could be used in Brazil to potentially evaluate, just to determine, to assess the scope of application of the LGPD. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry again for not being able to speak in Portuguese.
Agradecemos ao professor Antoine Thank you so much for your speech. E passo agora a palavra à professora Silvia Suzana Toscano, da Argentina, que falará sobre o sistema de proteção de dados na Argentina.
Muy buenas tardes. Agradezco la invitación a tan notable evento. Agradezco y felicito principalmente a la profesora Cintia y a todo su equipo, no solamente por esta iniciativa, sino también por todo el profesionalismo que han demostrado con anterioridad a la realización del Congreso, durante este Congreso, y sin lugar a dudas culminará de la misma manera, y toda la producción académica de este evento será con el mismo profesionalismo con que han encarado esta actividad. También pido disculpas, pero la única palabra que me animo, y ya inicio la exposición, a decirles en portugués es simplemente obrigado, nada más. Bueno, quisiera que me acompañen en esta exposición haciendo un abordaje tal vez más general de los datos personales, para luego en un zoom focalizarnos en la temática propia, en este caso que me toca presentar, que es el nuevo paradigma en la Argentina de los datos personales. Y en este abordaje que los invito a recorrer, me interesa que pensemos en un nuevo paradigma, en algo que nos involucra a todos, que es el Sistema Interamericano de Derechos Humanos, de protección de los derechos humanos. Este sistema, precisamente, es el que nos permite, a través de los estándares, otorgar certeza, seguridad y previsibilidad en los derechos humanos en el sistema interamericano. Este sistema está formado por, diríamos, varios microsistemas, pero me voy a centrar en tres, que es la libertad de expresión, el acceso a la información y la protección de la privacidad. Pero este nuevo paradigma, ¿sí?, presenta particularidades que son propias de la tecnología, de todo este adelanto tecnológico que vivimos día a día, con este dinamismo que además supone. Y me gustaría que por algún momento nos centremos en algunas cifras, ¿sí?, porque esto nos va a dar idea del entorno, del escenario en el cual nos encontramos. Diría que en este nuevo paradigma hay tres supuestos que es necesario revisar. Uno es algo que llamo la democratización de la conectividad. ¿Esto qué significa? Significa, obviamente, que esa democratización de la conectividad es posible porque hoy más del 57% de la población mundial está conectada. 57% son 4.388 millones de personas que se encuentran comunicados. De ese 57%, el 52% lo hace a través de dispositivos móviles que son fundamentalmente smartphones. Todo el mundo está conectado en todo momento y a cualquier sitio. Otra cuestión que también es necesario tener presente es la multidireccionalidad de la información. La información tradicionalmente venía en un eje vertical. Había un orden jerárquico que bajaba la información, ¿sí? Hoy la información, con la convergencia tecnológica, con esta arquitectura abierta que presenta Internet, con esta masividad de acceso, fundamentalmente lo que hace es horizontalizar esa comunicación. Vuelvo a los números, porque me parecen realmente muy importantes tenerlos en cuenta. Hoy, en un minuto de Internet, hay 1.240 millones de sitios. hay 350.000 twitters, 313 millones de posteos compartidos en Facebook, 100 horas de video, ¿sí? 32.000 horas de música. Imagínense toda esta información que está fluyendo en forma horizontal. Y sumo un tercer aspecto, que es esto que considero fundamental reflexionar, que es lo que de alguna manera el maestro Bobbio señalaba como la dicotomía entre lo público y lo privado, ¿sí? Esta dicotomía que él presenta realmente como una cuestión imaginaria de la sociedad, pero que define espacios, define los espacios públicos, define los espacios privados, ¿sí? Y que además hoy esa frontera entre lo público y lo privado realmente existe una falta de certeza, ¿sí? Porque hay una tendencia a la publicización de la vida privada. Entonces, brevemente voy a describir en este nuevo paradigma cómo están estos microsistemas. El sistema de la libertad de expresión en el sistema interamericano, el microsistema, prevé restricciones mínimas a la libertad de expresión. Y el sistema interamericano ha protegido, tal vez con mayor celo que otros sistemas de protección de la libertad de expresión, porque fundamentalmente por nuestra historia, la historia de nuestros países que en muchas ocasiones han tenido cercenada ese derecho, esa libertad. Pero también es importante describir esa dimensión que tiene el derecho a la libertad de expresión, que son dos dimensiones. La dimensión individual, que es la que permite al individuo expresar sus ideas, y la dimensión social, que es la que permite tener acceso a las ideas, a los pensamientos, a las creencias, a las opiniones y a la información de otros. Realmente, antes, en otro contexto, en otra convergencia tecnológica, la libertad de expresión en su versión individual solamente era exclusivo de aquellos que tenían el canal de comunicación. Hoy en día, a través de Internet y con todo este escenario tecnológico, todos somos comunicadores, todos tenemos acceso, con lo cual la dimensión individual se ha tornado en una dimensión social. Y esto es importante porque también tener en cuenta cómo protege la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos en su artículo 13, la libertad de expresión. También haremos una breve referencia a lo que es el derecho a la información, porque esta es una pretensión que está jurídicamente garantizada y que es necesaria porque es el presupuesto del ejercicio de otros derechos. En el sistema interamericano, el acceso a la información, la libertad de información, está además estructurada por una ley modelo de acceso a la información pública, por toda la jurisprudencia desarrollada por la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos a partir del caso Clodel Reyes contra el Estado de Chile, y además se suma la concepción del acceso a la información como un derecho humano que es así concebido por Naciones Unidas. Finalmente llegamos al otro microsistema, que es el sistema de la privacidad, la protección de los datos personales, que también está en el artículo 11, justamente, de la Convención Americana, en la cual se establece cualquier violación de la privacidad mediante injerencias, la protección de cualquier violación a través de injerencias arbitrarias. La Corte Interamericana también ha contribuido con su jurisprudencia y Lo mismo todos los informes de las relatorías en cuanto a la protección de la privacidad y por ende de los derechos de los datos personales. Y ahora esta me permite llegar al sistema argentino de protección de datos personales, entendiendo que no solamente podemos poner y focalizarnos en esto, sino tener en cuenta estos otros derechos y estos otros microsistemas anteriormente descritos, porque es necesario hacer un balance entre ellos, porque cada uno tiene su esfera de aplicación y esa esfera de aplicación tiene sus propias reglas y sus propias pretensiones garantizadas jurisdiccionalmente. En Argentina, la primera herramienta de protección de los datos personales fue dada por la reforma de la Constitución en el año 94. Nuestra Constitución era del año 1853 y no se crea en los nuevos derechos y garantías un derecho de protección de los datos personales, sino que se crea la herramienta jurisdiccional para su defensa y protección, que fue la acción de habeas data en el artículo 43, tercer párrafo de la Constitución. En el año 2000 se dicta, luego de un largo proceso de elaboración de estas normas, la Ley de Protección de Datos Personales y en el año 2001 su decreto reglamentario, que es la que hasta hoy nos rige. Esta ley, por supuesto, abreva en todas las normas pertinentes de la Unión Europea, el reglamento vigente en aquel momento, las directivas y, por supuesto, también en toda la jurisprudencia que a través de los distintos órganos se fueron desarrollando durante todos esos años. Y que también fue jurisprudencia adoptada por nuestros tribunales. También una autoridad de aplicación, la Dirección Nacional de Protección de Datos Personales, en la órbita del Ministerio de Justicia. Argentina logra en el año 2003, con esta ley y con la jurisprudencia que la acompañaba, que fuera reconocida por la Unión Europea, por la Comisión Europea, como país de protección adecuada. Finalmente, luego de un arduo trabajo de todas las comisiones, institutos, doctrinarios y también académicos, se logró que Argentina suscribiera la adhesión al convenio de 108. Finalmente, también, esto muy recientemente, en el año 2019, a principios de este año, se ha logrado la adhesión del convenio 108, denominado comúnmente 108 Plus, y esto marca una política de Estado que esperemos continúe. Ustedes saben que estamos en un cambio de gobierno y esperemos que esta política de Estado sea considerada, la protección de datos sea considerada realmente como un elemento esencial de la misma. También en el 2018 se envió al Congreso un proyecto de reforma de la Ley de Protección de Datos Personales, teniendo en cuenta que estamos con una ley del año 2000 y que del año 2000 al 2019 ha habido cambios tecnológicos que, si bien la interpretación que los abogados hemos hecho de la ley permite admitir nuevos institutos como, por ejemplo, los datos en la nube, que por supuesto no estaban contemplados en el año 2000, pero sí pudimos interpretar un artículo y poder concebir este instituto, que era muy importante y muy demandado para la industria y también para los consumidores. Y fundamentalmente lo que esta norma modificada, este proyecto de modificación que ha sido enviado, recepta todas las normas del nuevo reglamento de la Unión Europea. Hay una ampliación de todo lo referido a los datos a los datos personales, una visión que contempla los datos genéticos, que contempla los datos biométricos, que hasta el momento no estaban, sí, por interpretación, estaban contemplados. También una protección especial de los datos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, en congruencia con el protocolo de los derechos del niño, y principios de responsabilidad proactiva, que también están previstos en el reglamento, esta actitud diligente, estas medidas técnicas y organizativas preventivas que están a cargo del responsable del banco de datos, el interés legítimo del responsable, que estaba solamente contemplado en el proceso del instituto de la cesión, el deber de informar sobre los incidentes de seguridad, que no estaba previsto en la ley, si bien estaba la responsabilidad por la seguridad y la confidencialidad de la información, el derecho de oposición de supresión de tratamiento automatizado, la portabilidad de los datos, la detección de riesgos, la evaluación de impactos y también el delegado de protección de datos personales. Como hoy estamos viendo en Argentina este impacto del Reglamento General de Protección de Datos Personales de la Unión Europea. Obviamente tenemos tanto las empresas como las empresas multinacionales, como las empresas que pretenden tener negocios con la Unión Europea, están realizando adecuaciones en sus procesos para cumplimentar con las normas debido al ámbito de aplicación expansivo que tiene el reglamento y que no solamente está vigente para empresas que estén situadas en la Unión Europea. También está contemplado, se están contemplando en todas las empresas una adecuación de todas estas normas y también de todas las distintas etapas, ¿no?, de relevar los distintos consentimientos, las etapas en cuanto a determinar las bases legales, la identificación de interés legítimo. Y mientras tanto, ustedes se preguntarán, ¿qué hace la autoridad de aplicación? La autoridad de aplicación, como todavía no tiene esta norma modificada, sino que estamos con una norma como es la 25326 del año 2000, ha ido dictando algunas resoluciones conjuntamente con un nuevo cambio en la autoridad de aplicación argentina. Porque si bien decíamos en su comienzo que era la Dirección Nacional de Protección de Datos Personales, y así está prevista en la ley actualmente vigente, esa dirección, que pertenecía al Ministerio de Justicia y Derechos Humanos, ha sido subsumida en la autoridad de aplicación de la Ley de Acceso a la Información Pública. Por lo tanto, hoy la autoridad de aplicación en materia de datos personales es un ente autárquico con una independencia funcional. Pero, igual como sucede en otras experiencias que ustedes han manifestado en este evento, se encuentra con dependencia del Poder Ejecutivo. Este es un tema que seguramente deberá ser revisado, sobre todo porque la Unión Europea va a ser mucho más estricto, la Comisión especialmente, en el tratamiento de otorgar estos certificados de países con protección adecuada, porque se hará una revisión mucho más exhaustiva del cumplimiento de todas las normas vigentes en la materia. Ya para ir concluyendo, me gustaría que pensáramos un poco en el tema de la privacidad con este nuevo paradigma, de los datos personales en este nuevo paradigma, en relación al derecho a la información y a la libertad de expresión. Porque fundamentalmente debemos convivir con estos tres sistemas, con microsistemas, y también es necesario que pensemos con una perspectiva regional, ¿sí? Porque deberemos armonizar todas estas nuestras legislaciones. Nos debemos realmente una revisión de nuestros procesos, de nuestros sistemas de herramientas de protección de los datos personales, de manera tal que podamos tener una perspectiva en la región que sostenga y le dé soporte al sistema interamericano de derechos humanos. Algunas de estas cuestiones, obviamente, son todas las tecnologías, la neutralidad de Internet, esto de los límites que habíamos hablado en cuanto a lo público y lo privado, y también el rol de los distintos actores en Internet. Y sí, en esta última intervención me gustaría que pensáramos en todos los desafíos que supone este nuevo paradigma en materia de datos personales. El surgimiento de nuevos derechos digitales. Sé que hay expertos entre la audiencia que han tratado el tema, como nuestro amigo, y me parece que es muy importante, sobre todo, tener en cuenta que estamos en presencia de estos nuevos derechos que en este momento receptados por la Ley Española de Protección de Datos Personales en su capítulo 10, y que es muy importante tener en cuenta esto de la educación digital, la cultura digital, la transparencia y el acceso a Internet, la neutralidad de Internet, el derecho al olvido, la rectificación digital, la portabilidad, el legado digital, ¿sí? Y algo que me parece muy valioso, que es la identidad digital, ¿sí? Entender la identidad digital como un nuevo derecho que conjuntamente con toda la aparición de estos nuevos y el surgimiento de estas nuevas necesidades de protección, va a ser necesario que pongamos todo nuestro saber como abogados para contribuir a lo mismo. También algo que me interesa, que es la valoración de los intangibles. Hoy en día existen valores y activos financieros y económicos que no solamente están físicamente, sino hoy tal vez tenga mucho más valor aquello que está en lo intangible, que es fundamentalmente lo valorado por el consumidor, por el usuario, ¿sí? La cultura corporativa, la protección de los derechos humanos en la empresa, la reacción negativa del consumidor, lo que se llama en los negocios la creación de valor, ¿sí? Esto también es muy importante y es necesario que desarrollemos toda una concepción para entender cómo nosotros desde nuestra disciplina podemos contribuir a su protección. También me interesa que reflexionemos un poco sobre la resignificación, la reconceptualización de la privacidad. Hoy la privacidad no es la misma que todos aprendimos, ¿sí? Del derecho a estar solo. ¿Mm? Creo que hoy la privacidad, con todo este escenario, con este contexto tecnológico, requiere repensarla en función de este nuevo contexto. Hay una visibilidad del espacio público digital que obviamente impacta en esta noción de privacidad. Algo que también me interesa dejar como reflexión es considerar a los datos personales como activos políticos. Creo Brasil ha pasado no hace mucho por un proceso electoral, Argentina lo ha hecho en estos días, Canadá también, y realmente todos los datos personales que se recaban, todas técnicas de Big Data, de inteligencia artificial, de Machine Learning, que se aplican en el marketing político, es muy factible que puedan ser utilizadas para los perfiles de los votantes, como así también, como sucede, puede estar ligado a cuestiones fraudulentas como robo de identidad digital, ¿sí? Todo las herramientas que proporcionan los trolls, los bots, ¿sí? La identificación de audiencias, ¿sí? Todo eso también hace que los datos personales hoy sean muy importantes para este sector del marketing político. Y finalmente, creo que debemos aplicar los principios de la ética a esta nueva era, a esta ética digital, donde fundamentalmente tenemos que pensar en el correcto uso de las nuevas tecnologías digitales. Y creo que también es nuestra contribución como operadores del derecho lograr que esta ética digital sea realmente no una aspiración, sino una realidad. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, professora Silvia. Passo a palavra agora à mestre de cerimônias.
Obrigada. Neste momento, assistiremos um vídeo com a apresentação da palestra da professora doutora Federica Aresta, advogada doutora em Direito Penal, jornalista, consultora jurídica do presidente da DPA italiana e autora de muitos ensaios e livros.
First of all, I apologize for my absence, but unfortunately institutional duties oblige me to remain here. Sorry if I read, but I prefer to follow these notes, not to get lost in digressions that sometimes take the subject too far. Allow me to thank the organizers of this important conference for having invited me, but also for the choice of the subject, increasingly central today and increasingly in need of being declined in an international perspective. Nothing like data protection today, it is in fact necessary to compare different realities, different legal systems, different regulatory solutions for the mutual integration of the rules, but also to subject to a more careful screening positions that otherwise would be difficult to change otherwise. In this perspective, my contribution intends to provide a concise recognition of the position of the Garante in the Italian legal system, also because it is due to its first president, Stefano Rodotà, the writing and the wording of most of the Article 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, as well as many of the basic ideas of the data protection law. And let me remind you of the recently deceased Giovanni Buttarelli, formerly the European Data Protection Supervisor, to whom we owe a great deal of the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and who was our long Secretary General in the most important phase of construction of the Garante. Already from its statute, the Garante, the Italian Garante, presents certain specificities that demonstrate its quite peculiar role compared to other independent authorities. In this sense, not only the data concerning the procedure for the nomination of the College through parliamentary election by the House and not by the President, that occurs solely for the Garante with limited vote, just to ensure the involvement of minorities in the choice of the members, in which field the President is then elected by the same College. All these elements demonstrate how the legislator himself has understood as an institution for the protection of fundamental rights, such as of the Italian Garante and the Data Protection Authority, must necessarily be removed from the dominion of the majority and the same trust circuit on which governmental action is based. But above all, as reiterated in survey carried out in the present legislature by the First Commission of the Chamber of Deputies, it should be noted that the Garante is the only authority whose acts must be challenged not before the administrative judge, but significantly before the ordinary judge, demonstrating the impact that the provision of the Garante have on subject rights, moreover of fundamental rank. Finally, the importance that the Garante assumes in a supranational context cannot be overlooked, and that contributes to delineating a statute of guarantees that is completely different and much more significant than that which characterize other independent authorities. It is well known that Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and therefore Article 16 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, conferred a constitutional level on the national authorities for the protection of personal data. The Article 8, paragraph 3 states that the compliance with the rules guaranteeing the right to protection of personal data is subject to the control of an independent authority. It is clear that with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, which equates as regards legal value the Nice Charter with the treaties, the Garante has assumed constitutional importance pursuant to Article 117, first paragraph of our Constitution, being able to find its foundation not so much and not only in the General Data Protection Regulation, but rather in the Article 8, paragraph 3 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which in fact does not limit itself to providing for some minimum standards of protection of personal data, but imposes on the national legislature the establishment of a functional authority to guarantee the right of data protection. With a new European legal framework then, thanks to which the regulation not only of the right to data protection but also of the authority itself has assumed a super primary rank due to the direct European Union matrix, a limit has been introduced for the same discretion of the legislature, who in this matter must move within the EU framework without violating or derogating from the principles which moreover rise the rank of the rules imposed for the purpose of controlling constitutionality, pursuant to 117, first paragraph of the Constitution, Italian Constitution, as clarified also by the Constitutional Court with sentence number 20 of this year. Moreover, the opinion that, pursuant to Article 36, paragraph 4 of the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and 28, paragraph 2 of the Law Enforcement Directive on the processing of data for police and criminal justice purposes, it is necessary to acquire with respect to the primary legislation likely to affect the subject. Not surprisingly, almost all the opinions requested by Parliament in this first year of application of the law on biometric data, video surveillance in nursery school, anti-corruption law, etc., have focused on the respect of the principle of proportionality in the relationship between data protection and opposite needs to which the legislature must also adhere. The independence of the national data protection authorities is expressly sanctioned by the new European legal framework, but also by the treaties themselves, as stated by Article 16 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, is a subject of constant monitoring by the European Union. This is confirmed, first of all, by the well-known ruling of the Court of Justice of the European Union on March 9, 2010, in which, at the request of the Commission, supported by the European Data Protection Supervisor, it was found against Germany a violation of the rule referred to in Article 28, number 1 of the Directive 95/46, in the submission to the state supervision of the regional data protection authorities, such therefore to deprive them of the necessary independence. Furthermore, in favor of the relevance central to the obligation contracted by the Member States towards the European Union, assumed by the effective presence and possibility of functioning of the data protection authorities, the 2014 Court of Justice ruling, with which it was deemed to be in contrast with the requirement of independence of the data protection authorities, the early termination of the mandate of the same. In short, the same internal and European legal framework demonstrates the peculiarity of the Garante, which is the only independent authority indefectible as it is foreseen and not only legitimized by the European law of primary rank, as well, of course, derived. Since its establishment in 1997, the Italian Garante has been granted powers of a various nature: consultative decision-making, often also of normative value, para-jurisdictional and adjudicating, inspective and sanctioning, which were generally standard in the passage from the law of 1996 to the 23 Code, Legislative Decree 196, to date with the GDPR, with the adaptation legislation, of course, Legislative Decree 101 of 2019. From the first point of view, the mandatory opinion on primary legislation was added to the mandatory opinion on general, administrative and regulatory secondary acts. This is a particularly significant provision, as it is aimed at assuring compliance with the data protection regulation also by the legislator. Even decision powers have gradually expanded, with plans mainly of generally administrative acts, often granting, in spite of a formal nature, also substantially contained regularity requirements, as bringing in new order in force, general and abstract. With Legislative Decree 101, however, the instrument of general authorization, particularly significant in terms of effectiveness, was however suppressed, although general administrative acts continued to be envisaged. Relevant are also the para-jurisdictional powers attributed to the Garante since its origin, with function of adjudication and remedial protection against injuries to the right to protection of personal data. The provisions of the data protection regulation were then at times extended in their field of application by the complementary legislation, as in the case of the law number 71 of 2017, which attributed to the Garante the power to decide on requests made by children, kids, victims of cyberbullying. The authority, since its establishment, has granted also inspection powers and, in a more general sense of control, particularly insightful, extended also to the intelligence bodies, with the provision even of the unenforceability of the state secret, which represents almost a unique in our legislation, and which has been confirmed up until to the introduction of a specific reform by Legislative Decree 101 of 2018. However, these powers have been reduced today by expression provision of the GDPR and Directive 680 with respect to treatments only of personal data carried out in the exercise of the jurisdictional function, removed from the garant's control, for reasons of safeguarding independence and subjection only to the law of the judiciary, even if not to application of the data protection law. The sanctioning powers of the Italian Garante, although attributed to it from its establishment, have been considerably strengthened by the GDPR, with the provisions of significant pecuniary administrative fines of affliction that can be configured as punitive penal sanctions according to the qualification operated by the European Court of Human Rights since the Engel ruling. The effectiveness of the Garant action is moreover certified by administrative and penal sanctions for non-compliance with prescriptive provisions or inhibitors for the authority. Finally, the GDPR of the European vocation of the Garante has become absolutely clearer, whose action is firmly inserted within the system of data protection authorities of the EU countries, coordinated at European level, both on a strictly applicative and interpretative level of the rules, as well as on the strategic operational level. In order to guarantee the full independence of the Garante in the fulfillment of its duties, it has been established that the authority's operating expenses will be charged to a fund set aside for this person in the state budget and entered in a specific mission and expense program of the Ministry of Economy and Finance. The financial management report has been attributed to the audit of the Court of Auditors. The fund for the functioning of the audit of the authority and therefore allocated annually in the budget law. However, Article 156, paragraph 8 of the Legislative Decree 196 of the 2003 does not provide for a formal consultation of the authority with regard to the adequacy of the appropriation in a budget session. It is reasonable to believe that this involvement was considered implicit in the general forecast of consultation of the Garante in the phase of adoption of rules incident on the matter. As we have seen, therefore, the rules that from 1996 to GDPR now have succeeded have progressively emphasized the centrality of the Garante in the system of guarantees of the right to the protection of personal data. An important moment was the constitutional legitimacy of the data protection authorities as an indefectible guarantee authority by the Lisbon Treaty, which also allowed to overcome the doubts advanced on the real legitimacy of this authority in our constitutional system and maybe in every constitutional system. Another important moment has been the entry into force of the GDPR, which has increased and better defined the powers of the data protection authorities, also with respect to primary legislation, sanctioning its European vocation and centrality in guaranteeing the dignity of the person in an increasingly digital society. Thank you for the attention.
Bem, participar e a oportunidade de assistir um painel como esse é uma grande oportunidade, né, ao ouvir aí as experiências do Canadá com o professor Antoine, com a professora Silvia da Argentina e com a professora Federica da Itália, para nos fazer aí refletir sobre os desafios que nós temos pela frente, pensar nos nossos problemas, que são muitos, mas também pensar nas soluções, né? O primeiro painel já começou abordando essa questão dos nossos problemas e das soluções que nós vamos encontrar. Imagino que o professor Gabriel esteja cheio aí de questões para debater, porque não há dúvida de que ouvir a experiência estrangeira nos ajuda na reflexão sobre as nossas questões, né? Que, na verdade, estão só começando, né? Nossa abordagem do tema ela está só começando. Então, eu já passo imediatamente a palavra ao professor Gabriel para os debates.
A todos, são experiências muito ricas, Canadá, Argentina, Itália e tantas outras que foram compartilhadas nesse evento. Eu gostaria de começar os debates deste painel, que deve se estender depois para a plateia, considerando alguns pontos que me chamaram a atenção das apresentações dos professores Antoine Guillemant, Silvia Toscano e da apresentação da Federica Aresta. Uma percepção bastante comum quando o direito intervém em determinados mercados, nós estamos aqui falando de mercados, também mercado de dados e de informação, é a de que essa intervenção pode ou é provável que produza algumas ineficiências, mas essas ineficiências devem ser suportadas em razão de algum outro objetivo de interesse público envolvido. Então, pode ser esse objetivo de interesse público, pode ser maior concorrência no mercado, esse objetivo de interesse público pode ser a proteção de algum direito fundamental. E, de fato, quando nós vemos a experiência canadense e europeia da aplicação territorial da lei, eventuais conflitos jurídicos Quando nós analisamos a complexidade das normas argentinas, italianas, brasileiras e de qualquer outro universo jurídico, imediatamente existe algo que retoma essa percepção muito recorrente, mas nem sempre correta, dos debates econômicos, de que esta intervenção produz custos e os custos geram ineficiências. Com relação ao mercado de dados, no entanto, lendo uma entrevista que foi publicada há algum tempo na revista The Economist, com um diretor de hospitais da União Europeia, ele trazia algumas informações surpreendentes. Com as normas europeias, o setor hospitalar estava muito satisfeito com as regras de proteção de dados, por mais conflitivo que fosse o sistema normativo e por mais complexa que fosse a gestão destas informações. E isso, então, levanta a suspeita de que aquela percepção inicial de que a intervenção do direito ou a criação de um sistema jurídico de proteção gera ineficiências, talvez não seja correta. E por que, então, nós poderíamos cogitar da satisfação ou da felicidade de algumas empresas com esse sistema normativo de proteção de dados? Bom, talvez porque, embora de um lado ele traga custos, de outro, ele também traz organização, ele traz estrutura para a gestão de um ativo econômico, que é a informação, com o qual, do contrário, poucos saberiam lidar. As empresas, os indivíduos coletavam dados, absorviam informações, armazenavam de maneira não criteriosa em sistemas pouco organizados, sem saber o que fazer com aquela informação. Então, talvez uma das explicações para essa estrutura dada pelo sistema de proteção de dados é que ele agora confere critérios para lidar com esse ativo econômico. Tanto que nós vemos uma série de processos até de contratação de terceiros para fazer inventários de informação, para fazer armazenamento, para estabelecer alguma organização racional na forma de lidar com esses dados. E uma outra explicação talvez seja o próprio sistema punitivo, nas sanções mais rígidas para violações aos dados. Isso tem violações à privacidade e à proteção de dados. Isso tem, claro, uma implicação que é, com toda a evidência, importante para o direito, que é a proteção de direitos fundamentais, mas ela talvez tenha implicado algo importante para as organizações. Enquanto as sanções eram muito pequenas, o assunto era menosprezado pelas empresas. Quando as sanções passaram a ser não apenas consideráveis, mas de aplicação segura por uma autoridade de proteção de dados, por exemplo, ela deixou de se tornar um assunto meramente operacional e se tornou um assunto da cúpula das organizações. Todos passaram a se preocupar com isso. Então, é isso que eu me refiro como uma estrutura de proteção de dados. Ela deu uma utilidade econômica e forneceu organização da atividade de gestão desses ativos. Eu gostaria de saber se concordam com essa percepção de que não tratamos aqui de um sistema jurídico de intervenção disfuncional no mercado, mas de um sistema jurídico que colabora para a eficiência desta economia da informação.
Muy acertada tus observaciones, y mientras te escuchaba pensaba en dos casos que sucedieron este año y el año pasado, y cómo se ha comportado la autoridad de aplicación y también cómo se ha comportado la justicia argentina. Y si bien decía que estamos en un proceso de modificación de la ley argentina, esto no significa que el sistema de protección se encuentra congelado o se encuentra obsoleto por una ley que data del año 2000, sino que a estos dos ejemplos me parece que son muy interesantes. Uno es una sentencia de la Cámara Contencioso Administrativo, un fuero muy representativo en nuestro país, que hace una interpretación respecto de lo que es la cesión de datos personales entre el Estado. Como en todas las leyes que abrevan en las directivas europeas en su momento y las leyes que nos rigen sobre todo en Latinoamérica, la cesión de datos requiere el interés legítimo, además de la consecuencia de la responsabilidad solidaria y la conformidad y consentimiento del titular de los datos. En este caso se trataba de una sesión de datos que hizo el ANSES. El ANSES es la entidad de jubilaciones y pensiones. Todos los datos de estas personas que tienen estos beneficios fueron cedidos de acuerdo a lo que entendía el organismo, sin necesidad del consentimiento de los titulares de esos datos, a la Secretaría de Comunicación Pública, que es otro órgano estatal que fundamentalmente ponía en conocimiento de estas personas una serie de comunicaciones o de información que a su criterio era importante que estas personas tuvieran acceso. La Cámara entendió que no existía interés legítimo, ¿sí? Y que a pesar de ser entre poderes del Estado, primaba el interés legítimo con esta nueva aserción que tiene tan fuerte en el reglamento, en el GDPR. Ese me parece que es un dato importante porque la justicia ya está actuando en datos que se encuentran en archivos públicos. Y un dictamen, una resolución muy reciente, de agosto de este año, de la Autoridad de Aplicación de la Agencia de Acceso a la Información, que es también autoridad de aplicación de la Ley de Datos Personales, la imposición de multa a Yahoo porque por un incidente de falta de seguridad se vieron afectados los derechos de miles de usuarios de manera tal que esto fue considerado luego de la investigación que realizó el organismo, que efectivamente no había habido esta responsabilidad proactiva que también pone tanto énfasis el nuevo reglamento y que seguramente será receptado en las leyes y en las modificaciones o en las nuevas leyes que se dicten. Y es interesante porque la defensa de Yahoo fueron dos. Una de carácter, digamos, procesal, que no estaba inscripta en Argentina la base de datos y por lo tanto no se encontraba dentro de la órbita de aplicación del organismo. Y otra fue desestimada, esta defensa, y otro tema que también, otra defensa en la cual esgrimió Yahoo, fue que se trataban solamente de datos nominativos, ¿sí? Pero entre esos datos que no eran solamente nominativos, sino que estaban las contraseñas o las preguntas frecuentes, ¿sí?, que los usuarios hacían para recordar su contraseña de acceso a Yahoo. Por lo tanto, fue condenado esta sentencia y fue ratificada también en sede judicial. Esto es de agosto de este año. Esto me lleva a pensar algo que vos reflexionabas, o que tú reflexionabas, el vos es nuestro, y que es el tema de la importancia del activo, porque la multa impuesta a Yahoo es una multa insignificante respecto de los montos que Yahoo maneja, ¿no? Pero sí la importancia del activo para el consumidor, para el usuario de esa red, o en este caso de esos buscadores. Y eso es lo que me parece importante, que toda además la estructura estatal de protección de los datos personales también tiene un correlato en la defensa que hacen los propios titulares de sus datos. Y creo, y estoy totalmente convencida que empieza a gestarse una cultura por parte de ambos o de los actores que están en el sistema de protección de datos, tendiente realmente a que la privacidad paga. La privacidad es un activo y dentro de lo que es la privacidad, los datos, uno más importante.
eu tive problemas com meu dispositivo de tradução, mas falei o meu melhor. Obviously, I'm going to continue in English. Maybe two things I understood. We had many references to the GDPR. And obviously, in the EU, they are just leading the way when we talk about data protection and privacy. And all around the world, we are just wondering, what should we do? Should we use copy-paste what they made in the EU, or should we just try just to find our own way? And I do have some thinking in this regard, because often it's the question of the adequacy decision. Many countries want to be sure that these, it facilitates the transfer of data from the EU to, for instance, Canada, Uruguay, Argentina. But at the same time, I'm not sure the very best solution is in the GDPR. And I think there's a way just to do better than what we have in the GDPR. And I know right now it's often, it's very weird when someone is saying that. But I truly believe that when countries are reviewing their own data protection laws, then obviously you have to take care just to take into account the GDPR, but you could potentially find other way just to make it maybe more efficient. And when we talk about the GDPR, often we think about data protection impact assessment, appointing a data protection officer, doing the idea of privacy by design, privacy by default. And I'm not saying those are bad ideas, but at the same time, it's very expensive. And many companies in the EU are not GDPR compliant. And it's been since 2016 that the GDPR has been adopted, and still we realize that companies are not compliant. So obviously, we have to think of the protection, the rights of the individual and protection of personal information, but at the same time, we have to find a balance with organization and make sure when we pass something, we can be compliant. And at the end of the day, and it's the only thing I understood from the presentation of Professor Silvia Susana. I used to be better in Spanish, but in the end, privacy it's not about compliance, it's about reputation. And many companies, I'm working with companies every day, they come to me on a voluntary basis just saying, we want to get better in privacy, and it's an argument to sell products and services. So I think, in a way, of course, we have the regulation and we have data protection laws, but there is also the industry, which is regulating themselves, just to make sure that, privacy is really the main priority. Thank you very much. I don't know if I was out of scope, but at least I did my best. And thank you very much for everyone just for inviting me.
Professor Gabriel, deixa eu ler mais alguma.
Mais que satisfeito, podemos continuar.
Bom, agradecemos mais uma vez os palestrantes, professor Antoine, professora Silvia, professor Gabriel pelas observações e por ter fomentado o debate. Gostaríamos de entregar uma pequena lembrança aos palestrantes, aos painelistas, com o nosso agradecimento por terem vindo ao Brasil e terem apresentado as palestras.
Agradecemos imensamente a contribuição dos nossos convidados.